All right. So the very first part is about Monica's current role and the employer. So Monica, can you tell us a little bit about Dolby? We know that since COVID, many industries are really transforming. And can you tell a little bit new trends that you found in the home entertainment and consumption purchasing industry? Yeah, now that we're not able to go to watch a movie in the theater, but as you all probably be aware, like AMC, the stock price has been really dramatic this past few days. So yeah, Monica, would you like to tell a little bit about this industry and Dolby?
Yeah, definitely. I'll start off with just talking about Dolby overall. I know it's one of those companies that a lot of people have heard about or have seen the logo, but they're not quite sure what the company actually does. So, at a very high level, Dolby creates technology that wants to enhance people's experiences when they essentially take in any kind of content. So, whether that's music, movie, TV shows, or anything like that, Dolby's creating technology to make that experience for you really something that you haven't really experienced before, like the highest possible experience. And the way they make money is by licensing that technology that Dolby creates to other companies. So one example of that you might have seen recently is Apple's most recent iPhone. They did a lot of marketing talking about how you can capture using the new Apple iPhone in Dolby Vision. So that's just one example of how we give our technology to other companies and they put it in their products. So you wouldn't go into the Apple store and buy a Dolby phone. You would go in the Apple store, obviously, buy an iPhone, and that just so happens to have Dolby's technology in it. So that's pretty much a high level overview of how Dolby makes most of their money. In terms of how their business has been impacted since COVID, I will say at the very beginning, everyone had a different forecast or their own personal expectations of how different market segments, we like to call them. So whether it's a TV, a speaker, a sound bar, the tablets, the phones, everyone had their own idea of what was going to happen. Like obviously people were thinking TVs are going to start selling, so we're going to get a lot of royalties. People are going to buy all of the Apple iPhones. We're going to get a lot. The car sales are going to go down, so that's going to be negatively impacted. But we really saw a mixed bag of results as the quarters started to close during COVID. So some market segments did perform the way we expected and some others didn't. But some initiatives that I did notice Dolby started to lean into more, one of them is called Dolby.io. And that is trying to get Dolby's technologies to everyday developers. So people who make content at home. So not necessarily like the Apples of the world, but people like yourselves who are just at home making music. So think of like SoundCloud or even TikTok, those kinds of content creators. Dolby.io obviously realizes that everyone's at home now, consuming more content, creating more content. So that's one way that they've leaned into the changing environment that COVID has caused and trying to continuously create new experiences for people.
Great. Thank you so much, Monica, for give us a brief knowledge about the industry. So I personally own the stock of Dolby, although I have been losing money in the past few days, but I'm still have very positive in the future its growth. So yeah, and then so next, let's talk about your role in corporate finance. What is your main responsibilities, and who do you work with, and how do you create business impact?
Sure. So at a high level, all of the financial analysts, whether you're just starting out as an associate level or at my level at a senior role, basically your job is to do a lot of financial analysis and basically evaluating the financial results, including the forecasts and the budget and things like that, and informing various parts of the business so that those leaders and those managers can make decisions to continue to move Dolby forward from a financial perspective. In terms of the roles, Dolby's financial organization is unique in that they have a rotation program. So all the analysts support various parts of Dolby's business. So for example, the marketing department has their own financial analyst. I currently support the legal team's revenue for just specifically the legal team. And then, for example, there's a research and development team that has their own financial analyst. So every analyst supporting, like I mentioned, various parts of the business is responsible for like making the budgets, doing the forecasts, reporting on the actual financial performance of that group. And then again, as I mentioned, informing the leaders of those teams so that they have the best knowledge so that they can make really informed decisions from a financial point of view.
Thank you. That explains a lot about what to expect, because our students, some of them are interested in finance. They may not like understand corporate finance in a deeper level. So can you elaborate a little bit about what is the most enjoyable aspect of your work and the least enjoyable part? To navigate the least enjoyable ones.
For sure. The most enjoyable part about my role is definitely the team and the people that I've worked for. Like I mentioned, we have a rotational program, and I can honestly say that each team that I've supported and every manager that I've had really enabled me to grow in the role in supporting whatever team it was at the time. I've only been at Dolby for about 3 years, and I've been on 3 or more teams supporting various parts of the business. Obviously, so there's a lot of learning involved, and you're really new, obviously, only being about 3 or 4 years out of college. You don't know everything, and I feel like every manager I've had has given me the tools to succeed no matter which team I've been supporting. I would say the least enjoyable part of my role, since Dolby is a unique size, like they're not as big as a Google, but they're not what you would call a small company. Like they have about 2,000 employees. And you can imagine, since it's a technology company, the finance department doesn't make up a majority of those employees. So sometimes we have processes that we could probably do with programs that are a little bit more advanced, like SQL, or things that are more automated. But oftentimes we don't have those very advanced programs because only the finance department would use them. So sometimes we find ourselves doing things in Excel a little bit more manually, which we obviously know could be done, like I said, more automated or more efficiently. And I think a way we kind of navigate through that part of the business is working across the various teams. So like I mentioned, I'm on the legal team. If I ever encounter something that doesn't seem efficient, I can easily reach out to the financial analyst who's on the supporting the research and development team or supporting the marketing team and say like, hey, how do you do this? I'm trying to improve my processes. And you have a bunch of people across every org in Dolby that probably do a similar thing. And you can kind of pick and choose and create your own way of doing things in a more efficient manner.
Nice, thank you. So yeah, do you think there's any myth that is common within your line of work, and why is it not true?
Yeah, I think this question, when I read this, I kind of chuckled at myself because when I was at Berkeley, there was a stereotype of people who were like doing the business route or like the finance route, especially like people who were very involved with the Haas program. And I think one of the stereotypes that I had when I was starting in the corporate world was that people were going to be really like cutthroat and just only care about their own success and just try to, I don't know, really move up on the ladder without like any awareness of how they impact other people. And I was really concerned that since my personality is not that way, I probably wouldn't survive. But at least my experience at Dolby was completely the opposite of that. I mentioned my managers earlier, but at Dolby, I started with a few other folks who had just graduated from college. They kind of paired me with a mentor, and as well as someone who helped me onboard. So I just never felt like I was being left in the dark to figure things out myself. I felt like everyone kind of picked up a little bit of all the new hires and made sure no one was left behind. They really went out of their way to kind of bring us up to speed in terms of Dolby's business, our processes, our programs, and everything like that. So I feel like the myth or the misconception that corporate finance is like super cutthroat and you have to fight for yourself and like not worry about anyone else was completely not true in my experience in this corporate finance route.
Thank you. That's really relieving. So yeah, students who are interested in this role, yeah, it maybe you can find your personality and then your pursue in line with the nature, and particularly with Dolby.
Mm-hmm.
So I know at this point, a lot of us are learning new tools and softwares. But what is the most commonly used software and tools with in your day to day?
So I mostly use Microsoft Excel pretty regularly. I would say about 75% of my day, there's an Excel spreadsheet open. And then we pull a lot of our financial data using SAP products like Business Intelligence and EPM. But yeah, mostly Excel.
Mhm. Great, that's good to know. So with that, if you have any questions during our conversation, feel free to type in the chat. So I'm going to move to the next part, talking about Monica's career path. So I know that you started full time at Adobe immediately after Cal, but you probably have done some other internships. So can you share with us a rundown of your career path and how you got to where you are today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I will probably start with my very first job, like real job was in high school. I was an administrative assistant at a consulting firm. I was literally just scanning old documents and like answering phones and everything like that. And it was also at a firm in Berkeley. So it kind of was just full circle when I started going to college there. But anyways, when I was actually a student at UC Berkeley, I had a variety of internships that were not even related to finance. I had one that was like marketing for a small food startup. And then a lot of my other experiences were taking on roles for campus organizations. So I was really involved with a lot of the dance organizations that you see or used to see people dancing like on Lower and Upper Sproul in front of Host Pavilion. Like I was very involved in those organizations, and I took up a lot of leadership roles that kind of gave me the experience that made me feel comfortable applying for a finance position. But even though my internships were not directly finance related, I think it just gave me a lot of skills that kind of transferred over and made me feel confident and qualified to take on entry-level roles when I started applying for jobs my senior year.
Yeah, so looking back on those good old days, right? So
Reminiscing.
yeah, I'm sure you mentioned you're an econ major, and also another one. And how do you feel were the most valuable transferable skills that you learned at Cal that you're now currently use at your work?
Yeah, so in terms of the actual job responsibilities that I saw a direct relationship from some of my classes were pretty much the basics of finance, like revenue is good, expenses should be less than revenue, and the basics like that I took from a lot of the economics classes. But I would say a lot of the skills that made me feel confident when I was interviewing was the interpersonal skills. Like obviously at Berkeley, there's so many clubs, there's so many people that you interact with. By the time I got to my senior year and I was interviewing, I felt really confident just having adult conversations with full-time employees because I knew they were looking at me as a student who's going to come in and fill a full-time role. And when I get to Dolby, they're not looking at me as an intern, they're looking at me as another adult. So when I was interviewing, I felt really confident that I got those social skills through my interactions with people, whether it was in class, on campus organizations, or anything like that. I had those skills ready, and I felt practiced in a way in terms of having those skills by the time I got to the interview rounds.
Yeah, thank you. So I hope you still, I don't know if you still recall, but some of the courses that you think students who are interested in pursuing a role in corporate finance should take.
Yeah, I do remember, I didn't take this class, but one of my friends who was in Haas told me that there was like an Excel class. I don't know if that still exists, but I wish I took that because everything I learned in Excel, I learned when I got to Dolby. And I was jealous of a few of my colleagues who said like they had taken Excel courses when they were in undergrad. So that's one that I would definitely recommend if that still exists. And then I was, like you mentioned, I was an economics major, and a lot of those courses for that major are very theoretical. So a lot of like charts that are supply and demand, and like you move the charts, but there's no real numbers on the chart, so very theoretical. But I wish I had taken something that was more specific to finance, like with a balance sheet and things like that, as well as maybe something more accounting related. I don't know if that exists at Berkeley or in Haas, but if it does, I would recommend doing that. Just having the bare minimum knowledge of basic accounting would have helped me so much more in my first year at Dolby, just because, like I mentioned, a lot of my economics courses were very theoretical and like market-based, very high level. But for my role specifically at Dolby, it was more, I would say, accounting knowledge would have been helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really insightful. So now I'm going to move on to the third part of the Q&A, which I believe a lot of students are interested in learn about recruiting. So first question would be, you mentioned Adobe do have a financial analyst program. So what do you think is the skills and experience Adobe and also other, corporate finance role may be similar are seeking in those entry-level positions? If some of our students are still freshmen or sophomore, they would like to, build up skills, what would you recommend? And then what do you think it's a compelling resume for a position like yours?
Yeah, definitely good questions to be thinking about from if you're thinking about it as a freshman all the way up until the time you're submitting your resumes. I would say when we're looking at candidates' resumes, it's always good to see that they had, like I mentioned, financial experience, whether that was in an internship or on-campus organization or really any leadership position. It's good to see that they have experience with like the buzzwords we like to call them, like forecasting or budget or actuals or OPEX or revenue. It's good to see that a candidate is familiar with those terms. That already gives you kind of one foot in the door if you already know all of those things or are familiar. And in terms of not just specific to finance, but any programs that you're familiar with, it's a plus to know that you can adapt and learn those kinds of programs. Like I mentioned, Dolby, we don't use anything super, super advanced, but it's always a plus to know that you have the ability to learn and apply those to other applications like a financial model or something like that.
Thank you. That's good to know. So my next question would be interview. So yeah, I do coach students who ask me kind of nervous about, oh, should I prepare for those like very technical, type of questions in a interview with a tech, corporate finance role? What do you think would be the commonly asked question? And as you can see right now, we are still all virtual. So do you have any tips in your day-to-day communication with your team and other colleagues? Any tips for preparing a virtual interview?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in terms of common interview questions, I would say at Dolby, if you don't have a direct, if you don't have an experience that directly calls out finance terms or shows that you have finance experience, being able to kind of draw a bridge between what you do have experience in and what we are looking for. Just being able to explain yourself and say, maybe my title wasn't finance related, but I do have X, Y, and Z skills that would qualify me for what you're looking for. And then other interview questions, a lot of the times at Dolby, we're just trying to get to know how you communicate, how you explain yourself, and we're trying to understand how you would work on a team. So a lot of times it's not necessarily like a specific question about finance that allows us to do that, but just overall, just being sure that you can have a clear conversation with someone, eloquently describe yourself as well. Just being clear communicator is something that I think at Dolby we always look at too. And then tips for preparing for a virtual interview. What I have seen in virtual interviews that I've done so far that really made a difference to me, it's almost like you're acting, kind of like really nodding your head to make sure that they understand that you're listening and still engaged, because you don't get that as easily over a virtual interview. Sometimes if I see someone like really taking notes as well as like nodding their head and just being really engaged makes a big difference. Like I mentioned, it's hard to pick up on the social cues that you are engaged and eager when you're looking at a screen. And then this is virtual or not virtual, but just having beyond the superficial questions, but just having actual detailed questions ready just shows that you are actually interested in the role and the company, not just like, oh, do you like it? Like that doesn't tell me that you actually care about getting this job. So I think those would be good ways to prepare for a virtual interview, just being very engaged, and expressing that you are actually interested and have done your research essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much. So I know a lot of students may talk about, oh, we need to network with alumni and professional if they are particularly interested in, finance, investment banking. But does networking matter for securing a corporate finance role? And then right now we're still, making a lot of events, and then also the informational interview and all kinds of talks, networking events online. So do you have any advice in making meaningful connections in such a virtual world?
Yeah, I do think networking matters whether we're in a pandemic or not. I would also say it's not always everything. Like, I was not a very social person. I didn't go to a lot of the career center events and like gave out my resume. Like, I didn't do that, but I wish I did. So it made me very hesitant when I was applying for jobs because I was thinking I didn't know anyone. And it definitely would have helped to know more people who were connected to other people or anything like that. So short answer is yes, it does matter. But I will say that that's only part of it, right? Like you still need to be able to essentially advertise yourself, talk about your skills, and just make sure you are a match to whatever role it is. But if you do have those networks, I would definitely say to use them. I know some people are hesitant to come off as like, oh, I'm just asking them for something. But I think in my experience, when people have reached out to me, it's really all about the delivery. Make it as easy as possible for the person that you're asking for some time with or anything like that. Be very clear with what you're asking for. Have specific questions lined up so that when you have time with whoever you're networking with, it's very efficient for them. Like obviously they have full-time jobs too. So just be very prepared with what that conversation will look like. Any advice in making meaningful connections? Oh, sorry. Like I mentioned, if you are going to reach out to someone like over LinkedIn or something, just make it really easy for them to say yes to you. Like propose times, propose like very detailed, like 15 minutes of your time on XYZ date, any of these time frames, let me know and I'll reach out to you. Like when people reach out to me like that, I think it's really easy for me to just like pick a slot and they basically did all the work for me. So that's what I would advise, just making it as seamless as possible when you reach out to people.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So I think one final question of mine is, do you have any other advice you would give? I know this sounds really broad for students who want to get into this field.
Yeah, I would just say do a lot of research when you start to apply for whether it's an internship or a full-time role. Just be very familiar with what the company does and especially with what that role for the job that you're applying for is supposed to do. I keep mentioning just making yourself very marketable. So being able to draw parallels between whatever that job you're applying for is and what your resume looks like. You want to make it as easy as possible for your future employer to imagine you in this role. Like you don't want to make the person who's interviewing imagine if you could be in that role. Like you want to make it very easy for them to see you like, yes, this person is very qualified. I could definitely see them doing that role. And that again just goes back to doing your research on the job description, on the company, and adjusting your resume for that role. I think one of the mistakes that I made when I was applying for roles was I just had one resume and I just didn't change it for any role. I just kind of said like, oh, it's finance, it'll be fine. And I feel like a lot of times now when I see resumes that are just very broad, the first thing I think is they don't want to work at Dolby, they just want a job. And I feel like that could be very highlighted during this COVID time. I think something we're weary of when we're hiring new employees is like, Are they just desperate for a job right now? Are they going to stay with us when we're not in a pandemic? So I think doing your research and just expressing interest will definitely give you a leg up when it gets to that point in the interview process.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monica, for all those great insights. I'm sure this already answers some of students' question, but now we get into the second half. I like to open up questions from the audience. So we are in a very small group. We only have 20 uh, students. Some just dropped. So I like to recommend you to just unmute yourself to ask questions, and this is a very good opportunity for you to have this conversation with Monica and ask your questions and maybe introduce yourself a little bit as well. And if you feel you're just shy, feel free to type in the chat box. So I would like you to really take advantage of this opportunity and value Monica's time with us. All right. So who would like to go first? Gentlemen? All right, so Benjamin, raise your hand. So yeah, sure. Do you want to unmute or you want to type in the chat?
Yeah, I'm just top here. So hi, I had a question about if you had any idea about the differences in a financial analyst role in different industries. For example, maybe from a tech company like Adobe to Fortune 500 to financial institution. Not anything specific, but just anything maybe you could throw out about differences in role, in culture, or in willingness to convert interns to like hires.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Just a disclosure, like I mentioned, I've only worked at Dolby since I graduated from college. And so I can only speak confidently about what that experience is like at a public company at Dolby size. But I do have a lot of friends who, after graduating, went to work for like startup companies and did finance for those companies. Like one of my good friends worked at Uber when she graduated, and we obviously compared our experiences. And a huge difference between our experience that I noticed was that a lot of procedures and systems were not already set up or put in place for her to kind of just follow, versus when I started at Dolby, obviously finance has been a thing for a long time. So they had steps, they had desk procedures, they had everything set up for me essentially just to learn and adapt to, versus at a startup like my friends, she was kind of figuring it out for them and setting up those processes for them for future people to inherit. As well as when at a startup, she was mentioning a lot of times rules change very quickly and their focuses, like the business focus, changes very quickly. So they kind of just had to adapt and not just wear one finance hat. Like sometimes she was doing accounting stuff and sometimes she was doing more stuff that I do, like FP&A. So it was a lot more dynamic in a role for a startup company from what her experience sounded like, versus at Dolby, it's a little bit more structured. It doesn't change as quickly. And most of the time I am doing more FP&A focused things. I don't typically go into the GL and put in entries. And I'm not typically doing like accounting or tax related fields, versus like I mentioned, in a startup, sometimes you're expected to wear multiple hats in that scenario.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. Yeah, so I know Peniel, you're up.
Hello, hi, I'm Penel. I'm studying business and I'm a senior. I have two questions. The first one, earlier you mentioned one of the lessons you learned in recruiting was sending one resume and how you tailored yours to the company you're applying for. I wanted to know what other lessons have you learned during your recruiting process? And the second question I had was, you mentioned research. Did that involve having one-on-one chats with people within the company, or did that involve, going through financial statements? I'm curious to learn more.
Yeah, so in terms of my recruiting process, like when I was a student, I think I had mentioned it already. The biggest one was adapting my resume specific to the company or role that I was applying for. And then doing more research is definitely something I wish I had done more of. And that, for me, what that looks like is kind of, yeah, looking at their financial performance if it is a finance driven role. And then as well as their overall company's goal. Like, for example, Dolby is a technology company and they're very focused on enhancing your experience when you take in content. So I wish I didn't feel as confident going into the first round of Dolby interviews, because I wasn't super familiar with like Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos and things like that. So I definitely feel like I would have felt more confident if I had taken just a little bit of extra time to just go over their website, look at the different tabs and things like that. And now when I'm on the recruiting side for finance, because the finance employees do the recruiting for college hires, sometimes I can tell when people kind of just mention Dolby Vision and Atmos or anything that Dolby's involved in versus saying like, oh, I saw this article that said Dolby Vision is now in XYZ TV. So making that distinction, I kind of remember candidates more when they're able to have a conversation, not just say like, yes, I've heard of Dolby Vision. There's like a distinction there a little bit. That would be an indicator that you did a little bit more research than the average candidate.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. So Lime, you're up.
Yeah, Liam. It's okay.
Hi.
So yeah, my question kind of, it kind of sounds like it connects to what you just said, but I'm a little bit of like an audiophile, I guess. And so I really chose more looking at Dolby than the specific financial position. I'm actually interested in like the marketing product side. And so I had a couple of questions regarding how I could apply, maybe if you knew like a recruiter or somebody in that specific side of Dolby, so I could start to talk to somebody in that area.
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, Dolby has they call it like the university recruiting or relations team, and they're specifically targeted towards hiring and recruiting either interns or full-time positions from candidates who are right out of college. And I have the email that is also publicly on the website. It's something with university relations in it or something, but I can definitely email it to you or put it on LinkedIn, however you want to reach out. And they actually just announced that they are hiring and recruiting for all interns for the summer program, I believe it is. So I don't know, Karen, what the best way is if I wanted to, or if someone wanted to reach out with that kind of information, but I can definitely give their email to you.
Yeah, I had a follow-up. So sorry, I don't know if someone's gonna go. So I talked to somebody at Dolby before and they were an intern, but like a year-long intern. And so I'm kind of confused as to the exact terminology used at Dolby. Is it that an intern is like your first year, or they were in the UX side? So I don't know if it's different depending on what department, but yeah, just clarify there.
Yeah, it is different depending on the department and the team and the specific job description. So obviously the summer interns would probably be like the 3-month time frame, but I have seen people get extensions or they continue to be an intern, but in a slightly different role. So that could be a driving factor between an internship or someone having an intern title for longer times than other people. But yeah, it does depend on like the team and your manager and extensions and things like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I'll reach out to you for the recruiting information. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. So Brad, you're next.
Hi, Monica. Thanks for coming today and answering our questions. I was just wondering, you were talking about in one of the earlier questions about how they had like the desk set up for you and all for coming to Dolby. I was just wondering how the first couple months transitioning were, maybe more of like getting to know your team members. And then if there are any like really cool events at the time that maybe we could enjoy when the pandemic is over. But
yeah, for sure. That's a really great question. I was really, when I was considering where I wanted to apply and what roles I wanted to take in when I was graduating, I was really concerned about the transition from being a student, obviously, to being a full-time adult, basically. Like I mentioned earlier, when these employers are hiring you, a lot of times they're not looking at you as a student anymore. They're looking at you as a full adult. And I didn't feel like an adult, so I was really concerned about that transition as well. But yeah, Dolby, the transition to start in that role was very smooth. They did everything that they could to essentially give me the tools to succeed. They were really good about having trainings and tutorials and introductions of our procedures, the systems we use, and everything like that. Like I mentioned, they give us mentors who are also in the finance department, who are a little bit high level, so like at the manager VP level. And then they also give us what we call an onboarding buddy. So that's someone who has been through the analyst rotation before. And that one was a unique experience because you can kind of talk to them about the things you don't want to ask your manager, like, oh, how do I book overtime? Or like, what do I use to request PTO? Like, what time do I actually leave? Like those kinds of questions were really easy to ask someone who was like closer in your years of experience. So I guess to answer your question, it was a really smooth transition from being a student to working full time and getting acquainted with Dolby's procedures and systems and everything like that. And then in terms of events, Dolby, prior to COVID, obviously, they had screenings in the headquarters. There's actually a cinema in the San Francisco headquarters. So I think it's about like once a quarter or something like that. They play a movie down there in the cinema, and you can bring in a guest. And then sometimes they have weekend screenings where you can bring like 3 people. So it was cool for me to be able to bring my family in and show them like where my first job was and everything like that. So that's one of the biggest events. And then we also have employee networks, which are basically like on-campus clubs at Berkeley, but the ones you can imagine are like the Women's Empowerment Network, a lot of racial and ethnic networks. And then we have the Early Career Network, the Parents Network, and things like that, that help you kind of get out of your day-to-day role and you can meet people outside of your team. It's more of a social aspect and things like that. And then obviously we have, I don't know why I said obviously, but we have a gym downstairs. So that's kind of cool. And you can also meet other people that you don't see by your desk every day and things like that.
Great, thank you. So Benjamin, you're up, and Taka, you're next.
Hi. I had a question kind of about the path of a financial analyst, at least at Dolby. Do you see people kind of shifting out of FP&A into other corporate finance roles, or is it more linear, like associate and senior as you are in right now, and then whatever is beyond that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of title, the role that we hire right out of college is the associate financial analyst position. And then your first promotion your title would change to financial analyst. And then the following would be senior financial analyst, and then manager, and then following that title trajectory. And then in terms of the rotations and like FP&A versus accounting and things like that, I would say that the doors are always open. Dolby Finance is really good about listening to what you want. So I myself have had a few rotations. I started with the research and development team, and then I rotated to what Dolby actually calls as the specific corporate finance team. And in that role, I wasn't doing very much like business FP&A, but I was more involved with like tax and treasury team, and a lot more like high level stuff, not specific to one business. But to answer your question, there's always opportunity to move around within the finance department, whether it is like technical accounting, tax and treasury, like I mentioned, or audit, internal audit, or business finance.
Thank you. All right, Taka, you ready?
Yes. Hi, Monica. Thank you for your info today. It was very informative. Yes, I just had a question. So I know that a lot of students, like maybe many of us here, and maybe even you or maybe myself, but a lot of times I feel like sometimes don't know exactly what like job we want to do, whether it be marketing or finance or accounting. There are a lot of jobs out there, right? And I feel like just because we're still students and we haven't had a time to kind of do all these different types of jobs, we just don't know exactly what we want to do, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was your case that you knew you wanted to do finance, but in case like let's say you go to Dolby and you work in a finance job first, but you just don't like it, is there kind of flexibility into going to like other departments within Dolby?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I had the same concern actually when I was applying for roles. It was my second semester of my senior year. I literally just went on Handshake and just typed finance and just clicked all the boxes and submit my resume. Like I had no idea. I didn't know if I wanted to do FP&A. I didn't know if I wanted to do accounting. I had no clue. So I totally get the concern. But what did attract me to the role at Dolby specifically was the rotation program. Like I mentioned, they assign financial analysts to various parts of Dolby's organization. So there's like finance supporting marketing, finance supporting R&D, finance supporting internal audit, etc. So that's what really attracted me to this role in particular, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I would get exposure to different departments, whether it was more knowledge about marketing, if I was interested in that, or if it was other departments in finance. So that's what attracted me to this role. And then to the broader point of just not even being in finance anymore, there are actually a few financial analysts that we hired through this college hire program to obviously start in finance that actually have migrated to other departments in Dolby. So there are 2 financial analysts that I think also graduated from Berkeley that went through this program, and they are currently in our like consumer entertainment team. So like the group that does like the TVs and the sound bars and things like that. So they're completely not in finance anymore. And there's another similar case where he's actually fully in the marketing department. So the short answer is yes, it's flexible, there's opportunity, but I think it's really dependent on like opportunities that arise. Like if there is someone who's in the marketing department that maybe leaves the company or goes to a different team, then obviously there's a gap that needs to be filled. It's not just like one day you decide you want to do marketing, then boom, you transfer over. There's like a lot of moving pieces when that discussion happens.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Any other questions? We have all right, so I'll give you some time to think about it again, and I would like to quickly share a flyer that we created. So David and I, we serve HOS student, and absolutely David also sees LNS student. But at the Career Center, we do have a very comprehensive career services, including one-on-one counseling events like today's. Handshake, your one-stop shopping for internship and job search. And I write an e-newsletter weekly featuring a collection of career insights and job postings. So go to Handshake to subscribe. And then we certainly also have 24/7, as right now it's really pressing, video on YouTube. And then we have a Berkeley Career Network platform for connect with alumni like Monica. So this is our service. And then I hope you can also consider joining other events that we are hosting in this spring semester. So we continue to have a bunch of career fairs, career connection. It's a larger networking mixer event, which Monica actually attended last semester's the Women in Business one. So that's where I had the chance to get to know her. And then more alumni career chat like today's event. So we have so many different other topics like, fintech, journalism, business analytics, marketing, you name it. And then I know some senior students, you may want to also consider applying to an MBA, which luckily you can now apply as a senior student and then defer for a few years. So I do have a deferred MBA application workshop in March. And then finally in April, we are going to host another consulting style type of event, where you can acquire, very hands-on experience to solve a real business project. So I have to see you in those events. And then also would like to thank you again for attending today's event. So David has a question. The company has amazing technology. Has it been harnessed to help keep team together? David, are you talking about Dolby, or do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, Dolby. It has amazing technology. I often refer to Dolby as the oldest high-tech company in the Bay Area. Been around for such a long time. But it's always been at the forefront of the technology. I just wondered, and some of them are great communications tools. I was interested whether it's been used to help keep you all together.
Yeah, Monica, that's the final question for you.
Yeah, I think our communications tool like Dolby Voice was initially used more at the corporate level, like for other enterprises, but we did have it in our own offices too, and we got to experience that Dolby technology as well. So that was one way that it kind of kept us connected and everything like that. And a lot of the experiences that Dolby delivers through media, like obviously all the employees get to see that, we call it like art and experience of that art, the Dolby technology. We all get to experience that, and in a way that kind of keeps us together too, because we all know we had some contribution to make that magic happen.
Right. And if any of you have a chance to go to Dolby, grasp it. They have amazing technology. The cinema is amazing. It's right over the subway in San Francisco, and yet you don't hear a thing. It's completely isolated, and the chairs even move with the sound of the movie.
Great. Thank you, David, for helping end today's session with a very good, touching commercial. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And I know a Friday evening, it's the golden time. So I really appreciate your participation. And thank you again so much, Monica, for spending time with us, and you are very, very helpful sharing.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say,
Students would like to
quickly,
reach out to you. What would you prefer? How would you suggest them to reach out to you?
yeah, LinkedIn is fine. Definitely happy to chat or whatever, even if it's just a quick question, happy to answer that. And I was just going to quickly say, I know I mentioned earlier that the university recruiting team just released all the internship roles that they're currently recruiting for. So definitely go ahead and check that out. And then specifically to finance, I do lead the UC Berkeley recruiting for the associate financial analyst role, and I'll be posting that in the next few weeks on Handshake. So if you're interested, take a look at that. And again, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, whether it's about Dolby or finance or not. Happy to talk to all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Monica. We look forward to working with Dolby for recruiting events. With that, I think that concludes our event for today. Thank you again, everyone. So I hope everyone has a very good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.